I just, for my language and the tone that was sent to us, that you don't feel that we're taking this
I'm going to call the meeting to order. If you'd please rise and join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Nice and close. Okay, agenda review. Kathy, anything to add?
Nothing to add. I just did want to let everybody know that Tim wasn't going to be here. He has a conflict tonight.
Okay. Well, Tim, she just wanted to let everybody know Tim couldn't make it tonight. He had a conflict, so Tim is not going to be here, and I'm not sure Charlene is not here. So I haven't heard from her, so. But we do have a quorum. The first order of business is the acceptance of the minutes of the board meeting of August 24th. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
This could be moved by Dr. Jim, seconded by Wendy. Okay, any errors, corrections, omissions for those meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor? Krista?
Yes.
Julianne?
Yes.
Tim is not here. Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Yes. Jim Pittman?
Yes.
Charlene's not here. Dana?
Yes.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. And the next order is the approving the manifest totals that are being signed today. The manifest total is $2,465,963.95. Do I hear a motion to approve the manifest?
Second.
Moved by Dr. Jim, second by Wendy. Okay, all those to approve the manifest in the total of $2,465,963.95. Krista?
Yes.
Julianne?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Jim Pittman?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. It's a time for public input. If anyone would like to address the board at this time, there's a microphone right in the front of in the middle of the auditorium. And we'll also have public input at the end of the meeting as well. And please state your name and the town you're from. Oh.
What? Hello, I'm
Yes.
Jackson Budman from Wolfeboro, and I'm a junior here at Kingswood. And one of the big concerns that I noticed during the spring was a lack of social integration, albeit group projects outside of the school environment or just like socializing in the school environment overall. And I think that going back to school, I have a few suggestions for ways to improve that. One of which is getting rid of the plexiglass and the 6-foot desk distance and implementing face shields so students can have conversations with each other like outside of the main class discussion and socialize. And another suggestion I have is instead of being inside for lunch, to be outside under tents in groups that are decided on forms ahead of time that you stay with throughout the entire semester. And of course, group projects outside of school for certain classes with groups that are determined ahead of time as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jackson.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Again, we will have public input at the end of the meeting as well. Yeah, that's all right. Come on up. Okay. Okay, seeing no one else, then we'll start with an update on the opening of school from the superintendent.
Okay. All right. Well, plans for the school opening have been going well. Parents have been receiving information this week from each school regarding the groupings. There'll be a Monday, Tuesday, Group A, and Thursday, Friday, Group B. Administrators also worked very hard to make sure that families were scheduled for the same day, so you didn't have one family scheduled for Monday, Tuesday, and another one scheduled for Thursday, Friday. Kids came in yesterday for the Jump Start program at the high school. Again, reports were that that went very well. The kids were excited to be here, very happy to be at school, and very well behaved. And the same thing for the 7th grade transition program at the middle school. Excited to be here, well behaved, and I think that they had a great day. Transportation, as you know, transportation was one of the things that we were concerned about. Could we really make all of this work given the number of students in the district and the limited number of buses? And thankfully, there are quite a large number of parents who are able to transport their own students. There are over 70% of parents are going to be able to do that, which is a great help. So that means we are able to run buses with just the 13 students so that the distance mitigation is there. And right now, it looks like the buses will be running on schedule. We don't have to do a staggered schedule based on where Mary Ann is right now in getting those routes done. So that's good news. The plastic dividers for some of our schools have not arrived. However, the plastic dividers were really an additional layer of mitigation. There are at least 3 other layers in place, and they weren't a part of the original reopening plan. So I think we're still in pretty good shape in terms of safety goes. It may be that our mask breaks are a little bit different because the plan was to have the mask breaks with the plexiglass up. So the mask breaks will just be looking a little bit different. The Chromebook and materials pickup is underway at each school. I was out at a couple of the schools today watching the parents go by. Everything was well organized. There was no traffic backup. So principals did a great job organizing that. Student pickup and drop-off procedures are going to be a little bit different this year, especially for our younger students that parents are dropping off. And those letters are going home. If they haven't gone home already, I think the vast majority of them have gone home. I think maybe another one is going home. The last one is going home either this afternoon or tonight. Letters have gone home to parents regarding the new screening tool that's set up in Power School, and parents have been sent or given information about how to create a login for their child. So every parent will be taking their child's temperature, putting that information in, and doing the COVID-19 screening checklist. That information will be uploaded so the school nurse can run a report to make sure that everyone has been checked before coming into school. Those students who maybe for whatever reason don't have that completed, the nurses will be ready when they enter school to bring them to the office and to make sure that screening gets done, and then just to call the parents to remind them. And I have to say, I met with the school nurses today, and it was a great meeting. They're going to come in early so that while the kids are on the bus, they'll be running the reports so that they can be right on it when kids come into the building. And also, it was a great meeting because we have a couple representatives from the hospital within that group, Sue Dion and Sue Wood, and they're involved in an infectious disease committee from the hospital. So they're really very helpful in terms of making sure that our school nurses are really up to date, and that's going to help me a great deal as well. And last but not least, our teachers have been preparing for their students, and we're all looking forward to seeing our students, whether it's remotely or in person. So that is it.
Thank you, Kathy.
And our next item is school athletics. As you'll recall, at the last school board meeting, there were some questions that the board had posed for Aaron House to do some research on, our athletic director. So Aaron has done a great job researching all of those questions, and he's here tonight to present the information to the board.
All right, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come back and speak with you again on behalf of Kingswood Athletics. I'd like to thank all of you for your support in having us move athletics to where we are now. We obviously started with our summer sessions, and we are now finishing up our first week of varsity practices. As I came in here this evening, varsity football, varsity boys soccer, varsity field hockey, cheerleading, they were all out there practicing. And I was able to meet with many teams this week, along with our athletic trainer, to discuss, just expectations of our students. And it was great seeing the excitement in their eyes. And I think if any of you were out there watching them practice, you can tell that they love being out there, being with their friends, and having the opportunity to play sports. So one of the questions that came up at the last meeting was schedule modification. And right now, the boys soccer team, the girls soccer team, volleyball, and field hockey, they each have 6 to 7 games scheduled beginning on or after October 1st. The opponents at this point for those sports include Plymouth, Kennett, Guilford, Winnisquam, and Prospect Mountain. So if you recall, we had talked about doing our best to provide a regional sports schedule. So for those sports, we were able to meet with those athletic directors and assemble a schedule, and we're excited to play those schools. Football schedule, the ink is drying on that schedule in my office. We just put that together over 2 hours. The reason football took a little longer, the football committee for the NHIAA, they just kind of needed to get their ducks in a row and provide some guidance on their open tournament format. So at the conclusion of that meeting, we were able to schedule 4 games for football, and our opponents, 3 are Lakes Region schools. 1 school is south of us, and that is Bow High School. Overall, between cross country, golf, the sports I mentioned, football, we've scheduled just around 40 varsity contests, and 1 contest is not with the Lakes Region School. So I wanted to share that with you tonight, just to make you aware of that schedule. Bass fishing, right now their qualifying tournament, we had discussed this at the last meeting too, that sport starts earlier than most sports. They need to get out in the lake when the fish are active. They have a qualifying tournament on September 24th. So I would hope that tonight we can discuss how we can get that program going and be able to not only attend the qualifying tournament, but hopefully they would perform well and be able to go to the state championship. Last year that program was runner-up in the state, so I know those kids are excited about representing our community. Cross country, we have approximately 4 races, all again with Lakes Region schools, Prospect, Kennett, Plymouth. Golf is being finalized, but as of right now, they have 3 to 4 matches, mostly with Kennett, so we'll definitely have a decent rivalry continue there. They have been invited by Moltenboro Academy to go to Ridgewood Country Club next Wednesday, which I believe is September 16th. So again, trying to get the golf team some matches with other schools. It is challenging to really stay at that 10-1 date. But again, we've been invited, and I hope we can discuss that as well. The middle school sports schedule is being built this week, and we hope by the end of next week that those matches for the middle school kids will be completed. Alyssa Freeman is our new middle school athletic director. She started working on those this week, and we have emails again with all Lakes Region middle schools to complete those schedules. There was concern brought up at the last board meeting really about the start date. Will our kids be ready? Will they be acclimatized, or just ready to go, I guess, in terms of being in shape? I think I have some varsity coaches here tonight. Most of our programs were doing summer sessions, and I believe all my coaches would agree that their kids are ready for interscholastic play probably now, but they of course understand that we are doing our best to adhere to that 10-1 start date. And just as a heads up too, we right now are starting later than most schools in the NHIA, and that was the plan all along. One thing to consider, again, just in consideration, if bass fishing and golf were allowed to possibly start earlier, could other sports start scrimmaging before their interscholastic contest? That's been asked by some of my coaches, and again, I would let you all have a discussion on that. There was a question about participation. As of yesterday, we had 327 registrations, and before, when we had registration open from May 15th to July 15th, we were sitting at about 350. So we've seen a lot of our families and a lot of our kids re-register and want to be part of the fall sports season. If I was to break it down by program, I believe that the question was asked about roster size, how many kids are in each roster. And again, these are registration numbers. After tryouts, obviously, those numbers do go down. Bass fishing had 30 kids register. Cheerleading had 10. Cross country, 25. Field hockey, 41. Football, 53. Golf, 29. Boys soccer, 58. Girls soccer, 37. Volleyball, 44. And that is combined registration between the high school and middle school programs. The question also came up about transportation. So at the current number of 13 kids on a bus at a time, transportation is a concern. I don't think it's something that we can't deal with. We've dealt with more challenging things than figuring out how to get kids to an away game. So I'm confident that working with Mary Ann Belanger, we will make sure that our kids can get to these games that we've scheduled. For example, though, just for consideration, if I was to look at my boys varsity soccer program and my boys JV soccer program, typically they're traveling together to their away game. If varsity was to roster 16 athletes and JV rosters approximately 13 athletes, with 13 kids a bus, we would need three large buses to get there. Consideration there, can parents transport athletes to help alleviate the pressure on the transportation department? For practices and transportation, a survey was sent out from my office on Monday. We asked the families to respond within 36 hours. We received 226 responses, so approximately 2/3 of our registered families. 72% of those responding said that they would be able to transport their children to their respective practices. That does leave 28% of our families possibly needing assistance in getting their kids to practice. Again, I think that would be a discussion. Question came up about coach and families in terms of participation. Are coaches comfortable participating? Are families and players comfortable participating? I did ask all coaches to contact me if they had concerns about coaching this fall. I received no responses. In our initial registration period for fall sports, again, as I said, we had over 350 registrations, and now we have 327. And actually, I just checked that before I left my office, because that was the number yesterday. We have 333 at the time that I walked over here. The question came up about open tournaments. All sports at this point are offering an open tournament of some sort. I believe last time we met, golf and football were the ones that hadn't made a decision on that. Golf, I thought, did a great job. It's a complete open tournament. Every team, every school will be invited to participate. The one thing is schools can only send 5 students, and then 4 kids will be scored. And then ultimately the team score will be totaled, and may the best team win. Football is using a point rating system. In order to figure out exactly how it was going to work, I need to get my calculator out. I didn't have time to really understand how that all worked, but they are trying to include as many schools as possible that would want to be part of that postseason. Coaching contracts, that came up as well last meeting. At this point, fall sports are underway, and my recommendation would be it's time to deliver contracts to our coaches. The only other thing that I have here from last meeting was the amendment that was added to the proposal that the athletic department had put forth. And the only concern with that at this point is the next school board meeting is on October 5th, and with some sports looking to begin earlier, possibly golf going next week, bass fishing going to their qualifying tournament on 9/24. Just how about, how would the board make a decision on that? Are you guys able to vote on email, or again, possibly discussion here in a minute? So I think essentially tonight, the athletic department would be looking for support to continue to move our program forward. As I mentioned, golf and bass fishing, and if those sports are allowed to start a little earlier, would it be possible for our other sports to be considered to start as well? Coaching contracts, and then I think ultimately discussion would be transportation and the transportation policy that I believe requires students to ride the buses to away games. And should that be something that you folks discussed tonight? The only other thing I'd like to mention is that 25 of our fall coaches have taken the NFHS, the National Federation of High School COVID-19 training for coaches and administrators. It's an online course, and we're getting more and more coaches to take that every day. So they definitely are doing their part to try to understand how to run a safe environment for their practices. And with that, I will answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Aaron. At the last council meeting of the NHIAA, there was a chart with all of the different sports and suggested start dates for those sports. Do you have that handy?
I do.
Because I know certainly golf and bass fishing were, two of the more high priority to get started early. Would you like me to share the dates with you? Yes, that would be great.
So the first date to play low-risk sports, and the NHIAA identified bass fishing as a low risk and golf as low risk, is September 10th. So that is the date that they are basically saying schools can get together and play sports.
Yeah, and I, being those low-risk sports, I would certainly support today is the 10th, that's the date that NHIAA said would be appropriate if you wanted to start those sports early. I would support that for at least those 2 sports at this point. I don't know.
If that was a motion, then I second it.
Okay. I won't make the motion, but if you'd like to make it.
Well, I make a motion that
Okay.
because they are low-impact sports, that they be allowed to start at the NHIAA dates as set.
Second.
Okay, so Krista made the motion, and Wendy? No, not
Julianne.
Wendy. Julianne seconded it, okay. So those are the two right now that we're going to vote on, bass fishing and golf. Okay, all those in favor of allowing golf and bass fishing to start basically immediately? Krista?
Yes?
Julianne?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Yes. Jim Pittman?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Chair votes aye as well. Thank you. What are the other dates that, I know football is the last, one of the last ones. What are the middle ones?
So the middle sports identified were cross-country, field hockey, soccer, and volleyball. And the first date to play those sports are on September 18th.
September 18th. I support that earlier date for those sports as well. In the middle tier, it's up to the rest of the board, but I would support that as well.
So I make a motion that those 3 middle sports be allowed to start on the date that the NHIAA is set.
Okay, so 9/18. Okay, do I hear a second on that?
Second.
Okay, Julianne, second.
Just to clarify, there were 4 sports. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
4 sports.
Okay, so any discussion on allowing those sports to start on the recommended dates by NHIAA? Okay, seeing none. Krista?
Yes.
Julianne?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Jim Pittman?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Chair votes aye as well. Okay, and then the last obviously is going to be football.
The last 2, yes, football and cheerleading. Cheerleading, our varsity cheerleading team does not compete interscholastically at this time. So they would essentially just be cheering at football games when we have those. And right now our first game for football isn't until that after 10/1.
Okay, okay. I'm good with that. If any other questions for Aaron at this point? Yes.
Aaron,
Kristen?
at our last meeting, someone in the audience brought up a concern about mouth guards not being required, and we were asked to think about that because of the issue of concussions.
Mm-hmm.
Has any more thought gone into that, or?
Yeah, I mean, my basic response there is that we, every sport that's mandated to wear mouth guards, we follow those mandates. And right now it's football and field hockey. So those kids are required to wear their mouth guards. All other sports would be voluntary at this point. Really all we're talking about is soccer, boys and girls soccer. That is a sport that the NHIAA pulled back on with mouth guard use. Again, I believe I said it last meeting, I'm not sure why soccer was pulled back with concerns on possible saliva being transmitted and field hockey wasn't. If I was to take an educated guess, I've been to a lot of high school soccer games, and if the ball is not around those players, even though their mouth guard is supposed to be in their mouth, they tend to take it out. They like to either breathe or communicate. Field hockey, they have 2 hands on a stick, so they really don't have the same opportunity to reach up and take that mouth guard out. I do have my varsity boys soccer coach here, if you possibly want to hear from a soccer perspective, but my short answer is, again, we follow all the rules in terms of what sports are required to wear mouth guards. The concussion theory on mouth guards, when I was growing up playing ice hockey in the mid-90s, that's all we heard, is you need to wear your mouth guard. Yes, you don't want to look like a hockey player with missing teeth, but it helps prevent concussions. If you did a Google search on mouth guards in terms of does it prevent concussions, the research is split at this point. So again, in the 90s, when I was playing, it was out there saying that mouth guards definitely reduce it. And right now, there's articles on either side saying yes, they do, and no, they don't.
Okay, any other questions for Aaron? Thank you very much, Aaron. I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. That was a great report. All right. Next, we have Dr. James Noble with us. Dr. Noble is the infectious disease consultant that we have established a contract with for the district. And he's here with us tonight. He has a presentation for us on the status of the coronavirus, which I think you'll find very interesting.
Thanks. I'm going to try to work from the mic if I can see the slides.
So we'll have to turn.
I don't know. I'll give it a try. I'm Jim Noble. I'm a practicing infectious disease doctor. I've been in this field for 38 years. I've taught at Cornell, Boston University, and Tufts. Since 2002, I've been at Concord Hospital in Concord, New Hampshire, mostly as a means to fulfill my lifelong ambition of living in Wolfeboro. My grandparents brought me here for the first time when I was 3 months old, and every summer after that. And as soon as I was old enough to realize that Wolfeboro and Brooklyn were different places, I really wanted to live here. My career took a variety of twists and turns that didn't become possible until 2002 when I went to Concord. My clinical interests have been, one, infection prevention, especially focusing on worker safety, and two, emerging novel infections. And so this year has been quite the experience for me. I am a consultant to 3 school districts and 1 independent school, and it's interesting to me that these 4 have all had different answers to the same questions. One of the things I've learned from doing this is that people are coming at this with different evidence bases and different funds of knowledge, and it's really hard to make good decisions, especially in an area that's changing as fast as this one. When I talk, I say that the disease is about 40% revealed and about 60% concealed. And I think perhaps we've gotten to 50-50. I saw my first patient on January 23rd. Actually, interestingly, it was a woman from Wuhan, China, who lives in Concord and had been to Wuhan in December. We've treated over 100 patients. We've had 4 deaths, the last one of which was the 3rd week in April. I'm going to go over some national and local epidemiology and then talk a little bit about what I think that all means in terms of schools opening up. But to start, if this doesn't work from here, I'm going to have to go up front anyway. Sorry. I do have a mic down here. Can you all hear me? I do have a mic here that is supposed to work. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to sit down then and work from my laptop, since I believe I can make it work. First things first, so that doesn't work. What we're doing. This is Nelson Mandela, and one of his most famous attributed quotes is that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So it's really important to focus on not the micromanagement of education, but what the big picture is. What we're trying to do here is get kids in school and get them to have the education that they all deserve. The first United States case of COVID occurred in Washington State on January 20th. A traveler from Wuhan, China, who went on to die. As I mentioned, the first patient I saw was 3 days later in Concord. And as we now know, these cases were emerging after a very widespread, worldwide spread of the virus had already occurred. At the start of the pandemic, there was a famous mathematical model by an outfit in Seattle that predicted that we would have 1 million deaths by the end of April. Of course, that didn't happen, as you all know. The IHME model overstated the number of cases, the number of hospital admissions, and the number of deaths by a factor of 10 to 300, depending on the metric that was being used. However, it was entirely rational in mid-February to take this projection seriously and to institute measures to prevent this catastrophic outcome. It's 8 months later now. We still have a lot to learn, but there are certain things have become clear. One is that the models overestimate both morbidity and mortality and didn't recognize properly different risks in different age groups. And I would add to this by saying it also didn't have yet a clear picture of how the virus would spread. These models were based on what I call a spilled paint model. That is to say, the virus is like a can of paint. You knock it over, It spreads uniformly out from the spill, gets thinner, of course, meaning less transmission the further out from the spill it gets, but basically covers the area. And the other presumption that they made was that 100% of the population will be susceptible. Neither of those things are true. This disease is a disease of clusters and so-called super spreader events, and we're going to talk about both of those going forward. In any event, it's fortunate, of course, that these models and this concept of how the disease spreads was incorrect. The things that we recommend doing now, that is the widespread use of masks, the 6 feet social distancing, the care with physical contact, the cleaning of surfaces, et cetera, all were derived in early March from coronavirus experts. There are 4 common human coronaviruses that have been circulating in the population for many years. There's also a 5th, Middle East respiratory syndrome, which is very restricted in its geographic spread. The original severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, appeared and then quickly disappeared in the year 2003 and 2004. And this virus is the 7th major human coronavirus, which of course has not disappeared. But anyway, so there are people who study coronavirus. There have been people studying coronavirus for a long time. The major economic incentive to develop vaccines was surprising to me when I learned what it was, and it's surprising to most people, and that is it is most profitable to develop a vaccine that reduces worker absenteeism. And since coronaviruses cause the common cold, cause laryngitis, cause tracheitis, and cause a lot of absence from work, there is a group at CDC that was quite knowledgeable about coronaviruses, and their input was the basis for the social distancing recommendations that we all know so well. Moving forward, however, we know that this disease is not this horrendous multi-million person spreading disease, rapidly spreading, uniformly affecting all population groups that was believed then, and we have to begin to consider now revisions to the original decision in early March, which actually I think was very well founded at the time, which was to send children home from school and keep them out until we had a better handle on what was going on. The risks to children are pretty well known, and I have some numbers about this that I'm going to show later on. But it appears that most infections in children are either mild or occur without any symptoms. It's interesting because the amount of virus that children have in their system is not less than adults, but the impact on them, except for one thing that I'm going to talk about in a second, appears to be much less. The subject of asymptomatic infections is very hot right now, and I would say only that it is a phenomenon which is not well understood. It is probably the case that most asymptomatic infections are asymptomatic because the viral burden is very low, and the hypothesis has been put forward, which I think is probably correct, that below a certain level people are not able to transmit the virus. But the ability to distinguish those asymptomatically infected people who can't transmit the virus from ones who are going to go on and develop symptoms has not materialized yet. And so a lot of what we do with management of asymptomatic people is still based on the presumption that they're all going to be able to transmit the virus. Even though that's probably not true, we don't have good tools yet to discriminate one from the other. The problems with returning to school are well known to everybody. The physical plant of most schools doesn't lend itself to 6 feet social distancing. Students are unfamiliar, although they're becoming more so, with masks, cough etiquette, and hand sanitizing, and class size, normal class size, certainly impacts both 1 and 2 in terms of being able to keep the environment safe for students and for faculty as well. This leads to the benefits of a hybrid model, which most places have considered thoroughly before adopting it. It facilitates social distancing. It reduces the number of students that staff have to monitor on any given day. It allows all students, even those who are at home, to participate in some education every day, even if they're not together in school. It optimizes the use of technology, which, as you all know, anybody who has kids or is around kids, they're very, very familiar with the use of the internet and the use of technology to learn things, some of which they probably shouldn't be learning. But this is an opportunity to teach them to use technology for a constructive purpose, and it permits individual attention to safety behaviors. At the end of this talk, if I get there, I'm going to review the four school populations that I'm dealing with and why they've come down with different ways to skin this cat. But as you know, the Governor Wentworth plan is a hybrid model plan. I've reviewed the plan. I've gone over it with your superintendent. And I think that the board and the working group that worked on this did a terrific job to get it all set up in such a timely manner. The one thing about infection in kids, which is quite concerning, is the existence of this so-called multisystem inflammatory syndrome, or MISC. There's a mystery disease that has occurred at a very low rate for a very long time in children called Kawasaki syndrome. It causes fever, it causes multi-organ damage, the worst one of which is aneurysms of the coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart. And in any event, after the very large outbreak in New York in the last 3 weeks in March, they began to notice kids, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, who had a disease that seemed very much like Kawasaki, but who were infected with this virus. In New York State, through the middle of May, the rate of MIS was 2 per 100,000 people under 21 years of age, which, as the slide points out, is less than the risk of being hit by lightning. But it is still something that we continue to monitor and continue to be concerned about. It doesn't appear that the rate is increasing. And whether this is a matter of genetic susceptibility or some other factor is just not understood yet. Mortality in children and adolescents is extremely low. We're going to look at some numbers about this a little bit later on. There are 85 COVID-associated deaths in children under the age of 17. People under 35 years of age account for less than 1% of all reported deaths. There have been none in New Hampshire. There's only one death in New Hampshire under the age of 40, and that person was 29 with multiple severe coexisting illnesses. So fortunately, in addition to uncommonly causing symptomatic disease, mortality in children and young people as a whole is very, very uncommon. It's interesting to compare this with influenza, because annual influenza-related deaths in children every year range between 40 in a good year and 180 or 190 in a bad year. During the H1N1 pandemic in 2009, there were 358 pediatric deaths reported to CDC, which is 4 times the number of pediatric deaths reported with COVID to date. Interestingly, we have not, most of the time, not considered school closings or mass isolation during influenza season, even though the burden of illness and even the risk of mortality is higher than it is with this disease. Now, what about the risk to parents and teachers? This comes up a lot. The risk from asymptomatic children who have PCR detectable virus. I mentioned earlier that this is a controversial area right now. Adults easily transmit the virus to other adults, and adults also easily transmit the virus to children. But child-to-adult transmission of COVID-19 is very difficult to run down if, in fact, it occurs. Even asymptomatic children with high viral loads seem unlikely to transmit the virus to their classmates or to the adults in their environment. In Sweden, which kept the schools open for children 15 years of age and younger throughout the pandemic without masks and without testing, the risk of infection in someone whose profession was an educator did not differ from the risk of infection to other adults in other professions. In Britain, the schools for young children have been back since May 31st, and in France, they've been back since early August, and they have not observed, so far anyway, excess morbidity among adults working in the schools, and it may relate to this sort of mystery about asymptomatic infections that is not yet completely understood. I want to talk a minute about testing. Routine testing of asymptomatic people is unlikely to produce useful information. It is likely, as we see in Wyndham as we see at James Madison University, and as I'm sure we'll see elsewhere, it is likely to lead to school closures because the only tool that we have right now to monitor and make defensive measures against SARS-CoV infection are these PCR tests. Is everybody here familiar with PCR? Enough to have me not explain what it is? Okay. So the problem with PCR is great in detecting viral or other infectious material. It's not really very good in assessing severity or probability of transmission because it is so sensitive. Some of you may have read in the New York Times, I think it was last week, it's possible that it was early this week, if your test is positive, it may not really be positive. That's not correct. The positive tests are positive, all right. What they mean is that the material identified by the positive test may not be transmissible virus. We know from studies in South Korea that after 10 days of symptomatic infection, they have not been able to isolate transmissible virus in any person. We know that people who become virus negative and then become positive again, so-called repositives, 98% of them don't have isolatable infectious virus. And this all needs to be sorted out before broad testing of asymptomatic individuals becomes widespread, or else you're going to have a situation, and we'll talk about the UNH event near the end, you're going to have a situation where people are told they have COVID, they're diagnosed as being a case, and we can't really prove A, that they're going to be sick, or B, that they're able to transmit the disease. And I wish this was not true. I wish that testing was in a better place than it is. To state the obvious, obviously symptomatic children and adolescents shouldn't be in school, regardless of whatever virus they may be infected with. And we are all familiar with the fact that school closings may cause harm, both in terms of increasing social inequity and harming students' in knowledge acquisition during the time of their life when this should be going on. And I'm sure you've all discussed this at length already. So then the other question that commonly comes up, and this has played a big role in the decisions made in Concord, SAU 8. Why can't we wait longer? This slide is my opinion. In fact, everything I say is my opinion. I collaborate with a lot of people in the online infectious disease and public health world. I'm fairly well known, but any opinions that I'm giving you here are exclusively mine, and I take responsibility for them. It's likely this virus will continue to circulate for the foreseeable future in the population. That means that a zero infection rate is not possible regardless of whatever measures taken to protect the individual. And so the question is, can we keep schools closed or keep education restricted for an indefinite period of time in order to mitigate risk in young people and small numbers of adults? That's really what the issue is, and that's why schools that are opening, and also why I think the hybrid model that you have is so attractive. In terms of testing, it's important to understand what you're asking for. The mantra of what we need is testing, we need more testing, we need to test. Everybody's very familiar with that. But to do a testing program, you have to say why you're doing it and what you're going to do with the results. And as we see now in Wyndham, testing of asymptomatic children and adolescents results in needless school closings. And if we allow this to become the predominant mode of dealing with this problem, we're really not going to succeed in our goal of getting people back to school. This is a graphic of current USA cases per million people that was current as of yesterday. And this is erroneously referred to as a second wave. That's actually not true. The first peak that you see is New York, New Jersey, and New England. The second peak that you see is Florida, Arizona, Texas, and California. And we're going to look at that in some detail in a little bit, but really, the United States is a large country. If you put the map of Europe with the countries outlined across the United States, Europe reaches from Alaska to Florida and from Maine to Arizona. And really, we haven't had one single event in the United States. We've had 50 different events occurring at different rates. And it's very encouraging that we're seeing a decrease in case numbers now, even without major changes in practice, public health practice, in the Sun Belt states. It is particularly important to me as an epidemiologist that in the Northeast, we're indoors when it's cold, and in the Sun Belt, they're indoors when it's hot. And I think this is leading us in the proper direction, which is to look at air handling, air processing as a major factor in what goes on with this disease. This is USA deaths per million, and as you see, the deaths per million were way up when the disease was very active in the Northeast, but the big increase in cases in the Sun Belt states was not associated with a big increase in deaths. And deaths, in fact, across the whole country, and certainly in New Hampshire, are now down at an extremely low level. I mentioned the last one in our hospital was the third week in April. This is true for multiple reasons. Number one, the care is a lot better. We understand a lot better about what to do. The tools that we have to care for people are better as well. But also, it does seem that the use of a positive nasal swab to define a case is identifying more and more people with very low viral loads who are not themselves transmitting the virus and who are not going to become sick. And that's just an issue of better ascertainment. This is a very important graphic talking about social distancing and other measures like that. The top line is the United States, the bottom line is France. My oldest daughter, Kingswood graduate, summa cum laude graduate of UNH, was teaching in France, and she came home on March 10th because it looked to her and to me like the schools were going to close, which in fact they did 2 days later. France practiced probably the most extensive social control / lockdown system in the world. In France, for 9 weeks, you couldn't go out of your house or your apartment. If you needed to go buy food, you needed to get a pass from the police. And if you were on the street and you didn't have that, you got arrested. So that was when people talk about lockdowns in the United States, that's not really the French model, it's not what we're really describing. And so what we see is the cases, during that period of time, cases went down. As soon as France went back to what we call lockdowns, that is masks when you're out in public, no indoor dining in a restaurant, no theater, no congregating in large groups, but people free to move around and interact with one another in a socially distanced and masked fashion, you see that the cases went right back up. Whereas in the US, which has practiced this semi-lockdown status, after we had the peak in the Northeast, after we had the peak in the South, cases are declining, and evidence suggests that they're going to continue to decline. That's just something to think about when you are asked questions, as we all are all the time, about what should we do about restaurants, what should we do about weddings, what should we do about this, that, and the other thing. And of course, the wedding in Maine is a cautionary tale. You can still get people too close together and too careless and produce a big problem. These are deaths of the United States versus France, and what you see is, again, all of the deaths happened in the beginning, in the first wave of cases in the US and the Northeast, in France, in Eastern France, and in Paris. And even though we had increases in cases in the US and they're having increases in cases in France now, the deaths have stayed down. And that's a really important concept, A, for you all to know, and B, for you to convey to your friends, your family, and to people who interact with you around being on the school board, is that rising numbers of positive tests, and I'm going to talk about UNH in a little bit, rising numbers of positive tests, both in other countries and in the United States, have fortunately not been associated with a dramatic rise in deaths as we saw back in March and April, which was really a very terrible time to be doing this stuff. A leading candidate for public office the other day said that there were 40,000 military deaths as a result of COVID. That's not correct. This is just the military. If you come across that citation, it's important to try to correct it. There are 58,000 military cases as of yesterday. There are 1,243 of them had to be hospitalized, and 90 died. So the number of the case fatality rate in the military overall is low, as you would expect in healthy young men and women. It's around 0.1%, 0.16%. That's just to get that on the record. Now, I want to talk again about social controls. We've all heard this, that responsible Northeast states practice strict controls and conquered the wave. I can't read this from here, but these are all, I think this is Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and New York. And we see the same thing in all these places, a rapid rise and then a fall down to what are now very low levels. The y-axis of these is very different. So the y-axis of New Hampshire is, I think, 50 cases. The y-axis of New York is 10,000 cases. So they're not directly comparable, but they do describe what we see as the biology of the disease. And we've all heard that irresponsible southern states relaxed their social distancing and precipitated a disaster. These are all slides from the end of July for Florida, Texas, and Arizona. And wait for it. So this is those states now. And these curves that we see with Florida, Texas, and Arizona are very similar to New York, to Massachusetts, to New Jersey, to France, to Italy, to Spain. Rapid increase and then hanging up for 3-4 weeks, and then a slow and rapidly increasing decline. So I think it's hard to compare states or other locations that are in the beginning or in the middle of their surge with states where the surge has been completed and draw inferences from that about what works and what doesn't work. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about New Hampshire. This is the New Hampshire epidemic curve. Our worst week was the first week in May. Certainly beginning the second week in March, we were very, very busy. The cases back then were all found, that's what I want to talk about, cases. The cases that were found in March and April were all found because they were hospitalized, and many of them were critically ill. We didn't have widespread testing. We didn't have the ability to check schools and daycare centers. It took the National Guard to finally come in and test long-term care facilities. So not only were the case numbers high, but they were also all people, or almost all people, who were sick. Beginning in the end of May, beginning of June, we started to see a decline in cases that's gone down to very low levels. Our average number of cases per day now is fluctuating between 15 and 30, is clustering around 20 or 22 cases, or I should say 20 or 22 positive tests every day in New Hampshire. Epidemiology of New Hampshire, 23% of the infections are from contact with somebody with known COVID. 23% also are community transmission. That means the contact was not known. 34% are associated with clusters, and that number is going to go up as the UNH event continues to be dissected. 17% are travel associated. That is people who left New Hampshire and went to somewhere where increase in numbers was known, and about 3% of people have no known risk factors. If you look at deaths, 82% of the deaths occurred in these clusters, most of them occurring in long-term care facilities or skilled nursing facilities, as you all are aware. Geographic distribution of positive tests in New Hampshire, you can see that Carroll County, where we live, 1.5% of the total cases in New Hampshire have occurred in Carroll County. 1.0, I think, percent of the hospitalizations and 0.2% of the deaths that have occurred since the beginning have happened in this county. So one of the things that you're going to see at the end is the state guidance about opening schools, hybrid models, full attendance, et cetera, that some of these numbers are what drive those state recommendations. So we are and we continue to be in a very low distribution area. There is an outbreak in a long-term care facility in Ossipee that's going on right now, and as a result, the percentage of total cases in New Hampshire has gone up to 4.7 for Carroll County. That still is a very tiny number. The cases in New Hampshire are still a Manchester, Nashua, and Salem phenomenon. Interestingly, not on the seacoast, even though Portsmouth has a lot of people that are out and about. They haven't seen the same type of disease activity that's happened in Manchester and Nashua in particular. And Concord Hospital is really, a lot of the cases that we've had are people that are sort of washed up on our shores from the south. There was a time in May when both of the Manchester hospitals were not able to take new cases, and we saw some of those at that time. All all positive tests in New Hampshire. I want to talk about this a little bit. The bottom half of this slide is distribution by age group. And we had 176 positive tests in people aged 0 to 9, and another 446 positive tests in people aged 10 to 19. That's out of a total of 7,500. Of those, in the 0 to 9, there were 4 hospitalizations, and in the 10 to 19, there were 5 hospitalizations and 0 deaths in both of those age groups. So even though, as I said before, kids do develop positive tests, kids are able to carry the virus. So far, the morbidity as a result has been very small. I'm going to skip this. This is not a good slide. These are the daily trends for cases as positive tests by reporting data. It just reinforces what we've talked about already. That little tail that you see there is the brothers at Theta Chi at UNH. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about that in a minute. So after the so-called safer at home, that is removal of the advice to stay home, the numbers have gone down and have stayed down. Again, remember, the y-axis in New Hampshire has very small numbers. The top number on the y-axis is 100, whereas in New York it's 10,000, I think. So that as you fluctuate from 19 to 21 and then back to 19, you see these bumps in the curve, but that's just the result of analytics with small numbers. So this is the state's current status as of last night. Community level transmission in the whole state of New Hampshire. The level of transmission is assessed to be minimal. The new cases per 100,000 over 14 days is 25. 25 cases, and that means a positive test per 100,000 people. New hospitalizations per 100,000 over the last 14 days is less than 1. And the 7-day PCR test positivity rate is 0.9%. Now, it's still true that most people who have a PCR test done have it done because there is a reasonable concern about the possibility of COVID, either because of symptoms or because of exposure. It's very hard still in New Hampshire to get a test if you're truly asymptomatic. So that means that of 100 people where there is legitimate enough concern for testing for COVID, 1 is positive. So when people talk about what ought to be done with someone who's been tested and when the results are pending, remember that number. We're talking about statewide 1 in 100. And in our locale, obviously that number is much significantly less than 1 in 100. So the state of New Hampshire metrics for in-person education. Community transmission, when it is minimal, that is less than 5%. And remember, we're well under that. Number of new infections less than 50, and number of new hospitalizations less than 10. Moderate are these numbers, and substantial would be COVID test positivity greater than 10% on average, new infections per 100,000 greater than 100, and new hospitalizations per 100,000 greater than 20. So that's what the state would consider to be substantial. Now, we have never been there. In the last 2 weeks in April and the first 2 weeks in May, we were not there. So in order for us to go from minimal to substantial, we would have to be seeing things that we have not seen yet. And based on our experience and the experience of other states, it doesn't seem like we're probably going to get there. Now, the school impact is different, though. They also have a metric for the level of school impact. Transmission within the facility, low is 0 or sporadic cases with no evidence of clustering or transmission within the school setting. Student absenteeism less than 15%, and staff capacity to conduct classes normal. That's what they consider to be low. Medium is 1 cluster that's been identified in the school. Student absenteeism is in the 15 to 30% range, and the ability to conduct operations is strained. And then high, 2 or more clusters unrelated, greater than 30% absenteeism, and critical staff shortages or inability to conduct business. And that's led to this guidance from the Public Health Department. When the school impact is low and the community transmission is minimal, or the school impact is medium and the community transmission is minimal, or if community transmission is moderate but the school impact is low or medium, is low, I'm sorry. The state considers that it should be possible to conduct in-person education. They have a default to go down to hybrid with substantial community transmission and low only staff impact. Once staff impact in the case of substantial community transmission becomes significant, they recommend a transition to complete remote education. And you can see the rest of this table as well. This is a very, in medical practice, the term liberal recommendation or conservative recommendation really often describe the same phenomenon depending on what your interest is and where you stand. But certainly the state is being quite liberal, in my opinion, about when it should be possible to conduct in-person education. And the importance of that we're going to get to in a minute. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. It's very important to understand, I alluded to the fact that because the New Hampshire numbers are very low, minor variances cause big deltas in the curve. The Theta Chi fraternity has been suspended at UNH. They had a party with a non-permitted party with 150 people in their house. There are 11 COVID-19 positive tests so far. Interestingly, it was 11 yesterday and it's 11 today. And I'm going to talk in a minute about what I think that means. This caused a very rapid and severe response from the administration. But the reason I put this up here as a slide is that in a state with only 22 cases, 11 people in one location will generate a headline that there's a 50% surge in New Hampshire cases, which, although as an arithmetical statement that's true, as an epidemiologic statement it's really not true. It's a big delta in the curve based on a singular event in a single location. Now, I think if these 11 positive tests in the, my daughter, who's also a Kingswood graduate, is a senior at UNH, and she is a major figure in the Pan-Hellenic Council. So she's, of course, is very aggravated. She's in charge of discipline, so she's very aggravated about this. One of the things is not all of the 150 people who are at this party have come forward, considering that it's perhaps not in their best interest to do so. But I think that if the party was in fact a super spreading event, that we should see these numbers going up already. And the fact that that hasn't happened makes me wonder if these are not 11 unrelated people coming from all over who brought their COVID nasal swab with them. We'll see in the coming days whether that's true or whether it's not true. So just to wrap this up, I'm sorry for going on for so long. These bullets are, again, my opinion, but I think they're well substantiated. One, things are getting better, especially in the realm of deaths. Our understanding of this very complicated disease is improving. Preliminary results of vaccine trials, which I haven't talked about, are encouraging. Students and teachers are anxious to get back to school. The hybrid model offers the opportunity to start in-person education slowly and carefully, but the state of New Hampshire has provided us and continues to provide excellent real-time data and recommended metrics to create a roadmap to full in-person education as soon as the situation permits. And I think that if things go as I expect they to go, we'll be seeing this as a decision to be taken as we move into winter months and certainly as we move into the spring. Now, I'll tell you that I'm advising one school that is one school district that is back to work full-time in what they refer to as green status, that is to say 100% in-person education. Concord has decided to go fully remote, but the chairman of the school board and half the school board has now resigned, and there's some discussion about whether that's the right decision. St. Paul's School has a very complicated situation, as you might imagine. I was there today, and they've designed, they have tremendous resources, of course, so they've designed an in-person, fully socially distanced scheme to do their athletics and their academics, which is quite interesting. And now we're here talking about the Governor Wentworth hybrid model. I've read the plan, as I mentioned. I think it's excellent. And for everybody who's involved in doing it, I commend you. It's really a terrific product, and I really can't stay to take too many questions, but if there's one or two, maybe I could do that. Or you could say, thanks for talking so long, but we've got to move on. That's up to you.
Dr. Noble, what quantifies a cluster when you were talking about that?
Great question. Yes, and the answer is the cluster is in the eye of the beholder. I think the public health department considers 3 individuals unrelated to one another living in the same place who develop COVID-19 to be a cluster. But again, I think it is, they and we all are in a very difficult position because of the difficulty interpreting these positive tests in people with no symptoms who don't develop symptoms as they're monitored over time. That's what that phenomenon is, and what it means is the most important thing about this disease, and it is the thing that we understand the least.
A follow-up question. Someone has a positive test, and then they were symptomatic and now are not.
Yep.
But then they're shedding the virus, and then they are getting multiple tests repeated, and they're still positive.
Bad plan.
What I heard you say, I just want to make sure, was we have no way of knowing that after length of period of time if that person could in fact transmit the disease. No,
if I said that, I said it wrong.
Well, no, I wanted to make sure I heard you right or wrong.
Yeah, so both the South Korean CDC has done more work in this field than almost anyone else. But our CDC has reproduced a lot of the work that's been done in South Korea. And no one in the world has isolated replication-competent virus from someone more than 10 days after the onset of symptoms.
Okay.
Now, they have in the CDC's recommendations, they've created an out, which is to say that someone who is severely immunocompromised it may be 20 days. That's not based on data, that's based on concern about saying the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. But I think that in previously healthy people who develop symptomatic disease, mm-hmm. that you can't isolate infectious virus from them after 10 days, which is the basis for the new isolation recommendations that it end after 10 days for somebody who's had symptomatic disease, as long as they're no longer symptomatic. The problem is that they've gone on to add on 10 days after the first positive test, mm-hmm. to include this very large asymptomatic group. My concern with that is that I think it's going to prove to be the case. If you look at the asymptomatic group as a pie chart, the most important asymptomatic people are the people who are pre-symptomatic. They have a positive test and they're going to be sick in 4 days. It looks like that's a really small slice of that pie. But until we can identify them, I think we're stuck with 10 days from the first positive test in those people as well. But I'm hoping that we'll have better tools to get out after that.
Thank you.
I actually have a question, and this is a very pragmatic question that I didn't have a chance to ask you when we were together.
But that's why you're the superintendent, I'm not.
So the question that's on a lot of teachers' minds right now, particularly the teachers that have responsibility for physical education, is about sharing of materials. I know we've been very, very cautious, and we've purposely been that way.
Yep.
And we have separate materials for children when they're in school, but I know when students are outside, it's very different because the air certainly mitigates some of this. So
yeah, outside is really good. I mean, I'm speaking about trends in our understanding of this disease, but outside is really, really good.
So the question that I've received recently is, what about the sharing of balls, jump ropes, things like that for phys ed classes and outside?
Yep. I think that I can't answer your question about sharing those things. I can tell you that we've gone to cleaning once a day, mm-hmm. from cleaning every 2 hours within the past week. I think that the evidence that physical objects transmit this disease to people in a way that can make them become sick and become transmitting the virus is very, very weak. And I think that in the beginning, as I said, there was an understandable and rational approach to look at every conceivable risk for transmitting disease and to interdict them. But I think this is a face-to-face disease. I think this is the duration of exposure is important. And I think that the fact that this is an indoor disease when it's cold in the Northeast and an indoor disease when it's hot in the South, again, all of this to me is air, and people being in close proximity to one another. And I think that I sent you an article from the Atlantic magazine, but I think there is a consensus emerging that those physical objects just are not very important. Now, changing something that's been set out as federal policy, that's a different matter altogether, because there are federal policies from 1928 that haven't changed. So I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you not to worry about that.
I think I'd rather err on the side of caution and safety. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I am very much looking forward to working with you. You're just going to be a great resource for our school district and really help us make some decisions that will be coming up in the near future. So thank you so much for being here. And
thank you.
She has a question.
Yeah.
Just one.
I'd actually like to make a couple questions while you're here, because if you leave, I think you're maybe the key person to be able to answer some of these things.
I got a phone conference in 4 minutes I can't miss.
Okay.
That's why I said originally I couldn't take questions.
Okay, well then I guess I'll just address them to the school board. A lot of what you spoke about was actually on my mind. However, I guess I'll put this forth. I received the email today from you, Kathy, and I thank you for sending our check-in process for our kids. However, as a parent, I am absolutely, I guess, worried about how we're proceeding forward, that we are actually going to have a system where parents and caregivers are responsible for taking children's temperature in the morning and filling out this questionnaire. The problem with this is there are a lot of people who, first of all, I'd like to know how many people in our district don't even have thermometers. A bigger question is, are we going to be supplying them with thermometers that are correctly calibrated? I know that as a parent, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I knew I sent my child to school with a fever because my at-home thermometer is not calibrated correctly. So if we don't have a check-in system at the school door, we're relying on people who primarily really don't even care to check their child. And these are people who are actually, a lot of them in our community, willing to give their children Tylenol to get their children through the door. So that's just a concern. It's been a concern for 5 weeks. I asked it at the first meeting, why are we not checking these kids as they're getting on the buses? Why are we not checking the children at the door? Why are parents? But a bigger issue, which I wanted to discuss while Dr. Noble was here, was saying that our children are not having adverse effects from COVID right now, honestly is ignorant. We just had the Big Ten schools cancel college football. Maine just canceled football also. The reason why they're doing it is the asymptomatic football players, which I think we all can agree are probably not the athletes who have the comorbidities, and they're more of our advanced elite athletes. The athletes who have asymptomatic COVID later on tested, 15% of them tested for myocarditis, the hardening of their heart. They're having issues. They can have cardiac arrest. They can die from this. But here we are talking about that our children can be out on a field without masks on, playing football, yet Big Ten colleges have canceled football. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you're moving forward. making decisions for these kids. Because scarring of their heart is for the rest of their life. And for what? A football game? That just doesn't seem logical to me. It's just even hard to comprehend that that's where we're at. I guess, so my question with that is just the high-risk sports. I really would like to ask you guys to think about it before you approve these games, before you approve. I know they're already out on that field, but all it takes is one child passing COVID to that whole team. They're maskless. They're breathing heavy. We know that's happening. So I guess those are my two things. I don't understand why there aren't thermal cameras at the door of our schools checking in children, and why we're allowing these high-risk sports when even colleges aren't allowing them. Thank you.
Kathy, I think you're next on the agenda, and that's school lunch prices.
That was an actual question. I don't understand why we're not checking children.
Well, Bobby, you know that we have the procedure where, because you've discussed it, you've outlined it, where parents are responsible for checking, and that's the procedure that we've established. I'm not sure that thermal cameras are the answer for us. We have 8 buildings, and we are more than 8 buildings. We have 10 buildings if you include LRTC in Middleton, and multiple doors. So again, Bobby, I don't think we are poo-pooing it. It's, there are very, very different opinions about all of this, and I know the board has worked very hard to go through every email and to consider all of this very, very carefully. So I don't want you to feel like you're not being listened to, because I know the board is listening to you, and every single person that has spoken or has sent an email. So please. And again, Bobby, there are different opinions even about that, and even about whether it's worthwhile to take a temperature. So this is what makes this so hard, is the science is emerging, and there are so many different opinions out there.
No, that's fine. Kathy?
Kathy?
So I don't know if the board received the email that I had sent you, Kathy. I know I had it in my packet. But every year I have to go through and complete a price lunch equity tool. It's required through the National School Lunch Program. And each year it tests whether our full paid lunches at our elementary, middle, and high school level are enough to satisfy the federal government in making it equitable for our reimbursement from the federal government on our lunches. And this year, once again, going through this tool and inputting information, it comes up that we need to raise our lunch prices, and it's lunch prices only, up by 10 cents. So elementary prices would go up to $2.85, and the middle school and high school lunches would go up to $3.20 per paid lunch. Like I said, this is not free and reduced lunch prices. This is just the full paid lunch students. There is another option in which the general fund can pay for this. I guess the other option is to do a transfer from the general fund to the food service department if we were to negate the increase to the full pay lunch. I'm not recommending that because then next year when we go and apply for the school lunch program, we'd be even more so behind.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it
What's
just compounds.
what's the dollar number if we did that transfer? I mean, what are we looking at for?
It would be $14,095 we'd have to transfer.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really not in favor of doing that process. I'd rather raise again, these are fully priced lunches, and I'd rather see that minimal 10-cent raise and keep our numbers where they're supposed to be. So we would need a motion to approve the 10-cent increase if everyone feels that way. But
I make a motion to approve proposed increase of 10 cents for middle school and 10 cents for high school, lunch only.
and the elementary.
Huh?
Elementary goes
Oh,
up.
gee, you said elementary. I'm sorry.
Each one is going up 10 cents, correct?
Oh, I thought you said, okay, I apologize.
Yeah,
And
elementary's going to 285, and middle and high school to 320.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Okay, so motion by Wendy for lunch. Do we have a second?
Dr. Jim.
A second by Dr. Jim. Discussion?
When does this take effect?
With this school year?
This school year, correct.
So right away.
Yeah.
So we,
Yeah, every year we have to go through the same process to do the evaluation, and this is the time of the year that we have to make this decision. Any other discussion? Okay, Krista?
Yes.
Julianne?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Yes. Jim Pittman?
yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Chair votes aye as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is the administrative retreat review, and honestly, we didn't have much of an administrative retreat this year. We generally do something where we're all together for a period of time, and it's a pretty large agenda. We also do some professional development. We do some team building together, and this year, because of social distancing and mask wearing, we just did it differently. So we had our we had a very long meeting, and we also had John Wortman, and we had him via video or webinar, who was great. It was really about self-care strategies, which I think was great for the administrators, and also helpful because administrators are also trying to care for the people in their buildings and make sure that everybody is feeling, these are stressful times for everyone, for teachers, and I think students are probably a little bit more anxious. And so, we need to be conscious of that and be helping each other. So, and then the last is the New Hampshire School Boards Association. And did you want to
Sure.
talk
Well,
about that, John?
this is the time they're certainly reaching out for resolutions for next year, and I do want to talk about this funding.
Sure.
School.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, as many of you know, school funding in New Hampshire has been an issue because of the inequity among communities, and so the legislature has a commission to study school funding, and it's been meeting regularly since January, and it's required to submit initial recommendations by December 1st of 2020. The New Hampshire School Boards Association has been quite involved and has been attending the commission's meetings and tracking the commission's work. So there were a couple of important upcoming events, the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project, and they've asked the New Hampshire School Boards Association to distribute a petition supporting the efforts of the Commission to study school funding. So by way of NHSBA's support of the Commission to study school funding, and this petition is rooted in the following long-standing New Hampshire School Boards resolutions. NHSBA proposes that the state fully fund all state education aid formulas before the funding of any other state obligation. And the New Hampshire School Boards Association supports a continued review of all costs associated with providing the opportunity for an adequate education, including costs associated with facilities, transportation, and increasing the state commitment to reflect on the actual costs incurred. Any additional revenue raised by the state to meet this obligation shall be dedicated solely for the purpose of fully funding a constitutionally adequate education for all students in the state. And then the last resolution is the New Hampshire School Boards Association proposes that the state develop an equitable and sustainable tax plan dedicated solely to education for the purpose of fully funding a constitutionally adequate education for all students in the state. So obviously the theme there is equity in education, no matter what town you live in, all across the state. And as you probably all know, there is a lawsuit that is going on right now with Conval, and it is about equity, and the Governor Wentworth Regional School District has joined as a friend of the court, which is of no cost to the district. I want to make sure people know that,
Right.
but it does support the idea of all students having equity in education.
Thank you, Kathy. Good.
And I just, because this is the last part of my report, Bobby, I just want to let you know, if you send me in an email what your question, I'll make sure that Dr. Noble gets that and we can get back to you. Okay?
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, I don't have anything on the chairman's report today, so we're going to move right on to committee reports. Anything for academic affairs, Wendy?
Not at this time, Jack.
Okay. Julian, you definitely have to have something to tell us.
I don't have anything.
I saw something in the paper today about the Effingham site being ready to go.
Do you have an update, Kathy?
Just the fact that Jack, I just heard from Barrington Power, Jack Bingham, that the project looks to be done in the next 2 weeks. One of the items they're waiting on is Eversource to connect or do what they need to do to connect. And but he will let me know when we have a date for that.
Excellent. They did have a picture of the field in the paper today. It was really pretty
Gorgeous.
impressive.
He was so happy, actually, himself, at how it turned out. I mean, it's beautiful. The aerial shot is gorgeous.
Yeah, really looks great. Really looks great. Exciting project. Thank you. I have nothing for finance or human resources, so advanced planning. Right now, again, Monday obviously is the first day of school. And our next boarding is right now tentatively scheduled for 10:05. If we do have to meet earlier than that, we certainly will. But right now at 10:05, and I would assume that that meeting will probably be here again for the social distancing piece of it. And we may change that as time goes on if we can social distance, say in the the dining room or whatever. We'll see how that goes. But for the time being, we'll use this for the October meeting, most likely. Public input. Anyone else would like to say anything tonight? Okay, seeing nothing right now, we'll closing comments by board members. Anything tonight? Kelly, you have anything going on in Middleton? You guys getting ready? Okay. Dr. Jim? Nope. Wendy? Julianne?
No.
Krista?
Two things. One was when Jack opened the meeting with the public input, the young man
Yes.
that was here. I was impressed that he brought up concerns, but he also had some solutions to go with that, and that was just nice to see that they were paired together. And the other thing was that I thought Dr. Noble's presentation was very informative.
Thank you. Jim?
I'll lean over. Yeah, I also thought that was a great presentation from Dr. Noble. I will observe that he included that quote from Mark Twain, which I felt was very germane to this, because statistics can tell many different stories. And I'm afraid that you might get the impression that because of his statistics, we're supposed to believe there's nothing to worry about. I don't believe that was his intent, but by presenting the information in such a format that, oh, these are all low numbers, you know, this is proving not to be as bad as we thought, I'm concerned that's sending the wrong message. And I wish I could have had a more comprehensive conclusion at the end on that, but I just felt that that was unfortunate, shall we say.
Thank you, Jim. Dana.
I just wanted to say that this process has been extremely stressful for a lot of people trying to open up schools, and I appreciate everybody's comment. I would like to use the analogy of using the tops of these tables for 1-inch pieces of puzzle. Every table filled. Every piece of puzzle has been looked at and talked about and rehashed again. And now we're trying to put the puzzle together. And I know everybody wants a quick answer, but it's not there. Hopefully, the pieces of the puzzle will go together for the smoothest opening that we can possibly hope for. I think the first catastrophe is going to be the traffic backup tomorrow morning. But anyways, I want to be optimistic here. But thank you for being patient. We have been working on it diligently. And so good luck tomorrow with the opening. No, it's Monday.
Monday, that's okay.
Monday.
Yeah, Monday.
We know what you meant.
With the opening of the school. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, if there's no other comments, I would entertain a motion to go into non-public under RSA 91 A semicolon 3 paragraph 2 for personnel matters.
Second.
Moved by Dr. Jim, second by Wendy. Thank you. Okay, all in favor. Krista?
Yes.
Julianne?
Yes.
Wendy?
Yes.
Dr. Jim? Jim Pittman?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Chair votes aye. We're in non-public. Thank you very much.